I'm going to invite you not to turn in your Bible to 2 Samuel. It's been a long time since I've said this. Something else. I'm going to ask you to turn to Romans chapter 5. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to kind of work our way towards considering the whole picture of what Christ's death on the cross and resurrection from the grave means for us. And you say, I don't know why we need 4 weeks to consider that. Let me invite you to Romans chapter 5. There's a lot there. It is both, like many theological things, it is both simple and complex all at the same time. So we're going to spend the next 4 weeks just kind of meditating on the result of Jesus' death and resurrection on our behalf. I need you to understand, though, from the beginning of today. So let me warn you, this is not where we're going, not warn you, encourage you. This is not where we're going to stay, but this is where we have to begin this morning. I need you to understand that you and I are criminals in heaven's court. You and I are criminals in heaven's court. And if there's anything more to be said about us, it's not because of something that we've done. It's because of a work, a miraculous work that Jesus has worked in us apart from ourselves. Because if we stand on our own, you and I stand as criminals in heaven's court. Let me illustrate this. The little tattletale on my own life. When we lived in Kansas City, and there's a place, and this also can serve as a warning if you ever go there and you're in this area. A little place called Riverside in Kansas City. It's just across the border on the Missouri side, a little town in the midst of the huge metro. Riverside, Missouri. Riverside, they like to enforce traffic regulations. I don't know how to say it better than that. I drove through Riverside every day when I was on my way home from work. Worked in Kansas, lived in Missouri. This particular season, there was road construction on the highway that I frequented in that particular jurisdiction. I didn't realize the speed limit was posted something other than what I was used to driving in that area. Construction, slow down, lower speed limit. Makes sense. Well, I got caught going faster than the posted speed limit. There was, as there doesn't need to be, there was zero grace for exceeding the speed limit, i.e., breaking the law. Like to talk about it in more fluffy terms, but at the end of the day, it's breaking the law. I got caught breaking the law. I didn't think it was entirely fair the way that it was posted, the place that it was posted, the speed limit that was posted. I thought, I'll go to court. I'll argue in front of the judge. Being the upright person that I am, when that court date comes, I stand before the judge, my number is called, and so I go to the podium similar to this, and he says, "Are you James Poulain?" Yes, sir, I am. "Why are you here?" "Well, see, sir, I got this, Your Honor, excuse me. I got this speeding ticket. Well, are you guilty or not guilty? How do you plead?" "Well, I'm guilty, but..." "Okay, thank you. Pay the court clerk. Pay your fine." Time out. I'm supposed to be able to argue why I'm being honest in that I'm guilty. I'm being honest with you. I'm supposed to argue why I am guilty, but that you should lessen my sentence. There was none of that. Once the word guilty came out of my mouth, that was it. Now, had I counseled with somebody who knew these things better than I did, they probably could have told me, don't plead guilty. Plead not guilty and then argue. But because I didn't do that, I thought I would just show up and plead my case. Once I said guilty, that was it. Done deal. You have a fine, pay the court clerk, see you later. Don't waste any more of my time. That is a picture of us before the Lord. How, without the humor, because there's more at stake than just a fine. How do you plead? There's nobody that stands before the Lord. The creator of heaven and earth, the judge of all things, omniscient in knowing everything, and can plead not guilty. Because that plea does not stand up. The only words are guilty. And from there, the sentence is what it is. There's nothing else. Except for Romans 5. That's where we come to in the reality of our lives, but the reality of the work, the finished work of Jesus on the cross and in the grave. Romans chapter 5, verse 12. Therefore, we have to understand what the therefore is. Therefore, you've probably heard that before. Paul has just argued in 1 through 11 that we are guilty before the Lord. And really, he's argued that in 1, 2, and 3. Whether you are Jew or Gentile, whether you are God's chosen people or everyone else that he has created, Jews, God's chosen people, Gentiles, everyone else, you are guilty before the Lord. Whether you know the law, Scripture, or you don't know the law, Gentile, you are guilty before the Lord. Everybody's on the same page. That's what he's argued in 1 through 3. In 4, he's saying, hey, by the way, because of that, there's only one way out of guilty plea, and that's faith. And then he begins in chapter 5 to address what that faith is for and what it produces, essentially. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, okay? One man being, I need help. Sin came into the world through one man, Adam. Yes. That's all right. Hey, that's all right. Nobody heard it. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, okay? Sin comes in the world. There was a point at which sin was not in the world. And there are two people alive, Adam and Eve, and then sin comes into the world by one man. And now sin is still in the world because of that one man. And death through sin. And so sin comes into the world, and with sin comes death. Listen, you could have stayed home, friend. We would have been just fine for sin to come in and not bring its friend death with him. But sin and death are two peas in a pod. One does not go anywhere without the other one. And so where sin comes, death comes also. And so death spreads to all men, and that is not a statement of gender, that is people, humankind, mankind, because all sinned. Thus, the beginning statement, you and I are all criminals in heaven's court. We are all lawbreakers, sinners. Listen, you didn't want to come this morning and hear me tell you that you're a sinner. I get it. I didn't want to hear that either. It's a reality that we have to address. Luckily, it's not the end of the story. For sin indeed was in the world before the law was given. That's interesting. So what he's saying is, before the law, God's law, 10 Commandments and more, was ever given, sin was in the world. So there's no arguing. We'll get to that. I'm getting ahead of myself. Well, God, I didn't know. It doesn't matter. Law or no law, there's still sin. But sin was not counted where there is no law. It had not accumulated. Its presence was here, but it was not named and identified and the tab totaled without the law. Yet, death reigned from Adam to Moses, which is the period with which the law was not written yet. So, sin here, death accompanied it, even before the law was here, all the way from Adam until Moses, it was still reigning. Even over those whose sinning was not like the transgression of Adam, who was a type of the one who was to come. But, breathe that in for a second. Because so far, we're talking about sin for everyone, death for everyone. I don't know about you, but after I got up and had some coffee this morning, I wasn't... You're smiling at me, man. Hey, forget about the discussion that came up in Sunday school, habits and reliances, and anyway, I wasn't smiling about the presence of sin and death after that. I didn't wake up joyful that sin and death are here. Hey, hooray. But there's also the presence of something else, the reality of something else. The free gift is not like the trespass. For if many died through one man's trespass, much more have the grace of God and the free gift by the grace of that one man, Jesus Christ, abounded for many. And the free gift is not like the result of that one man's sin. For the judgment following one trespass brought condemnation. Guilty, condemnation. Guilty, punishment. Guilty, sentence. The one trespass brought condemnation for all men. So one act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all men. For as by one man's disobedience the many were made sinners. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate that. One man's disobedience, the many were made sinners. So by one man's obedience, the many will be made righteous. That's where we're going to focus in today. By one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners. Also by one man's obedience, the many were made righteous. This is the good news on the backside of the reality. I don't want to call it bad. I mean, maybe it's bad news, but it's just reality. We're sinners. Here's the first thing that I want you to see from the text that we read. Adam's sin wrote our guilt in stone. Before you were ever born, and I was ever born, Adam, whatever year that was, way back BC sometime, his disobedience and sin wrote our guilt in stone. It was done. Thousands of years later, it was done. Say, how do you know that? I at least had a choice, right, in the matter? Now, I ended up where I ended up, but I had a chance at the beginning. You didn't, actually. You had no chance. Why? You're an offspring of Adam. Where does it say that? How do I know that? Well, let's just trace that back. Verse 6. While we were still weak, I hadn't read this yet, right? This is before. While we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the who? The ungodly. Well, God is not a lawbreaker. God is truth. God is light, and in him is no darkness. 1 John chapter 1. God is everything that breaking the law isn't. God is everything that guilty isn't. So if we are ungodly, we have character that is unlike God, then we must be guilty. We must be lawbreakers. We must be sinful. We are not perfect. For the ungodly, those of us who are not like God. Well, that could mean something else. Fair. Okay. Look at verse 8. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, we, not Paul writing this, we, all of us, were still sinners. Or verse 12. This gets a little more broad. Sin came into the world through one man, and yet death through sin, and death spread to who? All men, all people, all humankind. All is a pretty broad term here. Not really any narrowness to it at all. It includes, guess what? All of us. All humans. All peoples. All mankind. And if that's not enough, we can go to verse 15, and we see that many died through one man's trespass. And 18, that one trespass led to condemnation for all men, and that in 19, one man's disobedience, many were made sinners. Guys, there was no hope for us. Once Adam opened up, let's call it Pandora's box, sin's box, that was it. We came into a world in which sin is present, and we had zero hope of coming out of this deal with zero sin. Zero hope of coming out of this with zero sin. We didn't have 0.00001% chance, right? Because then we could say, 1 in a million, you're saying there's a chance. No, not 1 in a million. Not 1 in 10 million, not 1 in 100 million. There's zero chance that we were coming out of this thing without sin. Adam's guilt and disobedience wrote that in stone for all of us. Here's what I also realize. We don't really like to see ourselves in this light. We don't like to think about ourselves this way. We don't like to think about ourselves as the guilty, as the lawbreakers, as the criminals. We like to think that's somebody else's business, not ours. And regardless of who you are and what's happened in your life, human nature is that we're always going to look to and find someone that has done more and that is worse off than we are and make ourselves feel better because we're not like them. And whoever the them is looking at somebody else and justifying where they are because they're not like them. And that them just keeps going. We don't like to think of ourselves this way. We like to think that we're just a little bit prettier or a little bit cleaner or a little bit less worse off than everyone else. Guys, we're not. None of us. Regardless of family, regardless of background, regardless of life lived, everyone sitting in here, or somewhere, I guess, out on the internet in earshot, everyone is guilty before the Lord. You might be able to go to this court over here and stand trial and be declared not guilty, but in the court of heaven, all of us are guilty, and Adam settled that for us before you and I were born. It's like, anybody seen the Chronicles of Narnia? Or read it, excuse me. Some of you book readers are like, man, it's not seen, it's read. Listen, C.S. Lewis wrote that dude way before Hollywood ever produced any sort of feature film. I have read it and seen it, so I can talk to both of you. It's good, huh? It's great. Yeah, you got to see it. They'll start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The first one's good too, but you can start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, not miss anything. It's a whole series. Chronicles of Narnia. Okay? Narnia is this magical place. came into being because the lion walked through and sang and things just sprouted up. Now that you miss if you go to Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. That is the magician's nephew. Is that right? Yes. Thank you. I see Tripp giving me a real firm head shake that I saw a few of you, but I saw Tripp for sure. Okay? The lion, yes, is the Lord, walks through. Once Peter and the brothers and sisters get to Narnia, it is winter, and it is cold, and it is frozen. Why? Because the White Witch is reigning. Okay, what's the big deal? Well, the whole land is cursed. And so when Peter and his brother and sister walk into Narnia through the wardrobe, they walk into curse. Guess what? When you and I entered into the world and we took our first breath, maybe even before that, we came into existence in curse. It's cursed. And we had zero way out because it's where we find ourselves. This isn't a fairy tale. It's real life. And the curse of forever winter is not quite the same as the curse of forever guilty, forever lawbreaker, forever fallen short of God's perfect standard. Adam wrote that into existence for us, which means that when you hold that little baby and you say, how precious, how sweet, I'm not saying that's not true, because it is. There's some peace there. That's a cursed sinner right there. A cute, adorable, precious, cursed sinner. It's reality. And it's what this text has already told us. Second thing that we see loud and clear from this text is that our sin exists even without the law. Meaning, we cannot claim ignorance. Well, I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do that. I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to say that. If you have kids or grandkids, you've heard this phrase before. If you are a kid or a grandkid, you have said this phrase before. And even if you're an adult kid, I have said this phrase before. And you who are adults were once kids, and you have said this phrase before. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to. Right? No? Oh, okay. Either you're sleeping or you're not with me. I just have to know which one it is. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that. Guess what? You're still guilty. And guess what? There's still a consequence for you. Right? I didn't know the oven wasn't on. Well, guess what? It's still hot. And you touched it and it burned you. Regardless of knowing or not knowing, that's what he says when he says that even before the law came, sin and death still reigned. Even for those whose sin was not like the transgression of Adam. Because Cain and Abel could say, hey God, you didn't come to me and tell me, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, like you did Adam. So why are you holding me guilty for that? Why am I guilty? Even if I didn't tell you like I did your father Adam, the truth is you're still guilty of the law. Okay? Here's what it's like. You're driving down that highway, unfamiliar stretch of road to you. Right? Speed limit, 70 miles an hour. Right? But let's pretend like it's I-40. I'm not sure if it's 75 or 70. I didn't see the sign. So what do? Well, I'm going to set my cruise control at a safe spot, 79. Right? 79. 4 miles an hour over, they're not going to give me a ticket for that. I'm not saying that you should think this way. I'm just saying this is an illustration, okay? You haven't done it, I haven't done it, but it could happen. 79. Next thing I know, somebody's behind me pulling me over. For what? I'm only going 4 over. Sir, do you know why I pulled you over? I really don't. Well, you're going 79 and a 70. Really? Which they will pull you over for. Really? Yes. Man, I thought it was 75 there. 70. It changes down to 70 once you get close to Shawnee. Right? I don't know this from experience, I'm telling you. Just a scenario. Well, I didn't see the sign. You know what? Still guilty. You're still 79 and a 70, regardless of whether you knew it changed from 75 to 70 or not. Even if it was 75, you're still guilty, although maybe they'll give you a little leeway for that 4 miles an hour. I don't know. It doesn't matter. You're guilty. Whether you knew it was 75 or it was 70, you're guilty. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to change lanes without signaling. You're guilty. You have the keys. Your hands are on the steering wheel. You're responsible for knowing the law. Right? And if you don't know and you break it, it doesn't mean that you're not guilty. You're just ignorantly guilty. The same is true in God's world that we live in. Whether you know or you don't, it doesn't change the fact that you're guilty, that you have sinned and fallen short of His perfect standard, and you are guilty. But, we say, but it's not my fault. It is, in some way, shape, or form. You had a choice. Well, I didn't have a choice. It was Adam who made me this way. You still chose. I still chose. Guilty. Our sin exists without the law. Ever before the law existed. You say, well, that's not fair. I didn't have a choice in the matter. Adam chose for me. I can't run from it because I'm guilty whether there's a law or not a law. Yes. There's no way out. It's a fairly bleak situation, right? Preacher, where's the good news? Come on, man. Well, 3. Sin for all requires condemnation for all. Man, it's not here yet. Sin for all requires condemnation for all. Listen, when we stand in court and the sentence is guilty, or the self-professed stance is guilty, it's not, hey, guilty, but hey, let me out of it. No. Guilty means there's a consequence for it. And there's maybe some variance for the consequence, yes, but there's still a consequence for it. If in our world, regardless of the crime and regardless of the law, if a law is broken and somebody stands trial in court, and at the end of that, a person is found guilty, right? What happens next? Sentencing, right? Now we're on to sentencing. Guess what you can't skip if the verdict is guilty? Sentencing. Now, you may get a fine instead of jail time, or you may get less jail time instead of more jail time, or you may get a life in prison instead of a death penalty. But there is sentencing after a guilty verdict. That's something that we can't escape, and that's what Scripture is pointing to even here. 16, for judgment came from one offense, and the result was condemnation for all. 18, therefore, as one man's offense, judgment came to all men, resulting in condemnation. So, Adam brought sin on all of us. Regardless of whether we knew the law or didn't know the law, we stand guilty before the Lord. And the result of that guilty verdict is condemnation. Hooray, Merry Christmas, Happy Birthday. Welcome to March 19th, 2023. It's the reality we live in. So, all right, preacher, give me some good news. Tell me the Paul Harvey rest of the story. Cool. That's why we're here, right? Because there is a fourth thing in verse 19 that we see. And that fourth thing is, for as by one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous. How do you make a guilty person not guilty? How do you make a lawbreaker not a lawbreaker? That doesn't happen, right? Once you're a lawbreaker, you are a lawbreaker, right? You could get your record expunged, you can do the time, you can suffer the consequence, you can pay the fine, you can do whatever you got to do. Insurance may not realize that you have that on your record because it's been hidden or taken off or whatever they do. I don't know. But it doesn't change the fact that you broke the law, you got caught, and you suffered the consequence. Guys, many of us are familiar with this story. Right? God made him who knew no sin, Jesus, to be sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. A lot of us are familiar with that story. Sometimes I think the complexity of that has escaped us. Sometimes we've been so familiar with that reality for so long that we've forgotten there was zero way out. We were destitute for condemnation. We were and are guilty before the Lord. And nothing you or I can do can change that. There's no cleaning ourselves up. There's no becoming better. There's no turning things around. We could do all of that, but it doesn't change anything about the past. And I could tell you instance after instance after instance, as you could also, of times and places that we wish that we could go back to and change and make a different choice. But you know what's common for all of us? None of us can go back there. None of us can make a different choice. Why? Because it's already done. It's already written. And we can not do the same mistake in the future. But all that's already been written. Just like when Adam brought sin into the picture, I betcha, that's a real technical term, I betcha he wishes that he could have gone back 5 minutes. And if I would have only known that I was naked, I wouldn't have eaten that apple or fruit or whatever it was. Probably wasn't an apple. I bet he wishes that he would not have done that he could take that back. But you know the one thing that he can't do and that we can't do? We can't go back in time. We can't change any of that. We can't fix it. So we stand before the Lord guilty and rightly and justly condemned. Unless something else happens. God exchanges our sin for Jesus' righteousness. There's a reality waiting for us that's not waiting for any of us if we ever find ourselves in that courthouse or any other courthouse. When I stood in Riverside, Missouri, in front of the judge, you know what there wasn't? There wasn't somebody standing next to me saying, hey, he may have sped, but I'll go ahead and pay the fine. Put the guilty on my record, I'll pay the fine, let him go. That person wasn't standing next to me. Why? Anybody up for standing in Timothy McVeigh's place? Taking on his sentence? His guilty verdict? No one? No one? None of you are that nice? I mean, I'm not making light of that. And I think he's been executed and everything now, right? Terry Nichols, life in prison. Anybody want to... I've seen and read about the prison that he's in Colorado. It's bleak. dark place. Solitary confinement 23 hours of the day, I think, every day. Anybody? Anybody want to trade places with Terry? Nobody? Why? He's guilty, right? And we're not. We didn't do what he did, right? Why would we trade places with him? None of us are jumping, ready to take on somebody else's sentence and consequence for ourselves, right? Even for something minor like a speeding ticket. There's no way out. There's no way out for Terry. Timothy's done. There's zero way out. So why in the world did the God of the universe make a way for you and me to be counted right before him? I'm not about to, and neither are you. But somehow in his magnificent love, in his overwhelming grace, God said, I don't want to leave them there. I don't want to leave them with zero way out. I don't want to leave them with no hope. They deserve it. They deserve every word of the sentence. They deserve every day of the condemnation. I don't want to leave them there. I want more for them. So he sent the one who was obedient, who knew no sin, to take my junk and your junk, all of it, and put all of that squarely on the shoulders of Jesus in our place, to do what every single one of us would never do for anyone else. The one who was not guilty was executed for those who are guilty. And that wasn't even the end of the story. Because even though he was executed and he was put in the grave, that grave was only needed for temporary conditions. Because on the third day, that dude popped out of the grave, defeating not only sin in our place, but that friend that came with sin, death. And sin and death no longer have a hold. That's what was accomplished by Jesus. Guys, don't miss and don't forget the complexity of what God has done for you and me. There was zero way out. We were backed into a corner. We had no hope. And he changed all of that. It was the greatest turnaround in history. The greatest Cinderella story, if you will, was that God could take a people like you and me, and he could do the work of declaring them righteous, declaring us righteous, not lawbreakers who are lawbreakers. So we ask, but how does that become me? Let me leave you with a picture of this. You guys have all heard of a guy named Barabbas? Okay, go to the other one first. For those of you who haven't seen The Passion of Jesus, you should see it. The Passion of Jesus, the Passion of Christ. What? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? This is the actor that plays Barabbas. I don't even have to take a poll in here. None of us see ourselves as that guy. Right? None of us want to see ourselves as that guy. Of everybody in the Easter story, we do not identify with Barabbas. Barabbas was a common criminal, a murderer, who was in jail, in prison, and rightfully so. And here comes this Jew brought before Pontius Pilate. You got all of these Jewish people saying, man, this guy's guilty, we need to kill him. And he's like, man, I don't want to deal with this. I'll give you a choice. I'll either turn loose this guy or I'll turn loose Jesus. Who do you want? Give us the murderer. Huh? I'm sure Pilate about fell over when everybody started screaming, Barabbas. Barabbas. Give us Barabbas. Let Barabbas go. Kill Jesus. Give us the murderer, the lawbreaker, the guilty one. You know who we are? The lawbreaker, the guilty one. And you know who took our place and died our death, suffered our condemnation? The innocent one. The not guilty for the guilty. There is no better picture of you or me than that guy. He got off scot-free when he was guilty as he could be. And somebody else took his place who had zero guilt. Guys, what do you do with that? One, you go, Lord, it should have been me. And that should be the beginning place of our confession. Not just when you became a Christian, but today. You may have been a Christian for decades. Lord, it should have been me. It should still be me. I still deserve to be in that position. You exchanged what should not have been exchanged on my behalf. Second, our response should be, you know that person that we love and that we hope, and God's going to let them off the hook because they just don't know. They don't know better. They can't help the way they are. You know what? Guilty. Condemned. Doesn't matter. Know, don't know. The way they are, not the way they are, doesn't matter. There's not a chance for them apart from Jesus. So you know what we need to do? If you trust Jesus as Lord and your confession is it should have been me and is by the grace of God that it was Jesus instead, and you have Jesus, you need to take that and deliver that news to the person that you're thinking of. Because unless they trust in the same thing and the same one and the same substitute and the same Savior, guilt and condemnation. It's not because, they're just awful. It's because none of us are not guilty standing before the Lord. And if we like to make ourselves feel better about the people over in Africa that have never heard, and we say, man, the Lord's going to let them off because they don't know. And they live there, and they don't have the word that we have. Guess what? Death reigned from Adam to Moses. Even before the law was ever a thing. Even before those who God spoke to directly ever knew. Without God's direct words. Guilty. Condemned. So there's a need and a necessity of taking that news to the people who have no access to it. So you need it. Someone that you love needs it. And there's a whole world of strangers that need it too. Strangers to you that need it too. Because apart from Jesus, we stand guilty and condemned. But when our confession is, God, I deserve that, and you have given me this because of Jesus, we stand right. Righteous. We have been given a righteousness, right standing that is not ours. Could never be apart from Jesus.